Hello.
Goodbye.
Bye. Okay, Seymour's class. Come in and lie on your back and look. No. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. Yeah, great. We can handle 20 in this room easily. Okay, now, before I start, Ray forgot to do advertisements for himself, and he'd like to hand out. What would you like to do?
I'll just do it.
Go ahead.
From your back. This is where Charlotte Selber, our teacher, gave workshops for 45 years, and I'm going to be giving a week-long workshop on Kings Island in August. So if that interests any of you, you can speak to me about it, and I have the flyers.
And there's a place in the other room where we have all the flyers.
Exactly.
And I'm going to remind you that dinner is at 20 to 6, but I will get them all the dinner is at 20 to 6. Yeah.
We're going to get out. It's 12 miles on the coast of Maine.
Can you do me a favor? I don't have enough stones right now. I have a plastic bin. Where did I put it?
Over there?
Yeah. Get me about 10 more of those stones. They're right in front of the doorway of where we go in and out. Okay, it's best to put your shoes against the wall somewhere. So I'm going to be working a lot on the floor and a lot with something that I forget what the statistics are, but it's close to 80% of the American population have back problems, spine problems, issues with hips and spine, shoulders and neck. And I want to focus a bit on this in this class of, like, what is your history with your back and spine? What has happened to you that's still with you as a childhood accident or injury or illness that's still in some way compromising your adult, well, let's say possibilities of movement. And can you bring your knees up now? And I may have more people coming in, I don't know, but I don't think so. Okay, great, thank you. So, bring your knees up, and I've got this list of, what is it, CEU people needs to sign in too. At some point, a bit later in the class, come in and sign in. It's up here on the table. Okay, so cover your eyes with the inside of your elbow or your hands, and just take a moment. Oh, can you come in? Don't sit there. That's a terrible place. Come right in here. And just take a little time to come in touch with your condition and your sense of yourself. We've been doing this over and over today. And I like to include also, as well as noticing where you're present and how you're present, where are you absent? Is there a part of the floor behind you that you're not much aware of, or a part of your back and head and shoulders that you're not very alerted in? Check that out now. As well as just allowing yourself to be dropping into feeling the floor under you and feeling your contact with it, with what we call my backside, my rump, my hips, my shoulders, and the back of my head, possibly in the middle of your back. There's a sense of contact with what's under you. And many of you will find as we go along this morning, I'll ask you often, or this afternoon, to bring your legs up to your knees up like this, because this brings more of your back into relationship to the floor. Many of you, and I invite you to do this as we go along, need to stretch a lot. Having your legs like this creates stress, and if it does, then stretch your legs out and refresh yourself as we go along. But then come back to this posture. Your knees are about shoulder width apart. Your feet are about shoulder width apart. And you're taking the time now to find what adjustments are helpful for you to come more in connection with lying now. What's going on with you and the floor? What happens to you when you begin to pay attention, and even more attention, to the subtleties between you and the floor? What happens? And as we lie here and become more awakened, those of you who've had injuries with your back or spine, do you feel some traces of that now? Anywhere? And how is it if I asked you to pick up a leg and very carefully bring it back to standing with your knees bent, so you don't have your whole leg in length, but you're lifting a bent leg already, and then landing. And try this a few times, just feeling out what happens. What happens when you get ready to lift your leg? What happens in keeping it in the air? What happens when you land again on the floor? And after you land on the floor, what happens? Can you feel how you organize with the floor to lift the weight of that leg? And you do that carefully and feeling, how does this really happen that I coordinate, prepare to lift something? And when am I ready to lift it? And how long do I want to carry it in the air? The weight, coordinate with that weight, and then land again. When I'm, let's say, stay in the air until you feel some stress or some sense that you're working at it, and then you come back to the floor. Slow down. Slow down and wait until you feel the impulse to move. And that you're not responding to my directions like an obedient student. You're more or less feeling out, now what does this mean to lift? What has to be ready in you, here and now? And as you go along now, can you adjust yourself if it appears that you're not arranged very comfortably with the floor? Can you arrange yourself so that you're in better relationship with what's under you and the structure of your bones and muscles? Who can land with your leg and foot and allow something to change in your hips and sexual regions? That landing and staying awake in your hips and lower torso for what happens here when you land. Can you stay awake in your hips and the transmission of change through your hips? And where else does it go? Try it out. Try to feel this as something to explore. Who's bored with it? Who's excited by it? Who needs to go to sleep? Please do. It's late afternoon, and in my classes, late afternoon classes, it's permitted permitted to drift off, be absent, go to sleep, and have a fantasy drift away in half sleep. That's okay. It's part of the class. Snoring is okay as long as it's creative. And gradually we give this up and just come to rest in any way we'd like to. If you'd like to turn on your side or lie on your front, do that. But come to rest now in your own way of being comfortable, or as comfortable as you can be given the circumstances. And take a moment to, or some moments, to digest and rest. It's a bit of a pell-mell tour all day long, and by this class I'm concerned the vessels are full. So I'm going to give you lots of space in my class to digest what's happening for you now, and also what's still continuing from the hours you've been with us. Feel in you something needs rest, and respond to that. Let yourself rest. How are your thoughts making an impression on you now? What mood comes with your thoughts now? What areas or zones of your body are responding to thoughts at this time? What's the nature of your thinking? Is it encouraging? Is it supportive? Could it just be accepting of what is? Whatever you're experiencing at this time. Maybe your thoughts find a way to accept it. Perhaps. be even more sensitive to the air in the room than you are at this moment. Even more waking up. What is this air? What is it? Without naming it. Just feeling it. And I'd like you to now, in fantasy, interiorly, to call out your name to yourself 3 or 4 times. And try it slowly and notice what happens. Notice what happens in getting ready to call out your name. And after you say it, and allow a pause. Silently, inside. Okay, now begin to get ready to come back to the whole group and stretch and yawn and come up to sitting. And take a partner, someone you didn't come with, someone new. Okay, now with this partner, share what you experienced. Talk about what came up, what was that like, and so on. The IU means I am in touch with myself. It is not an it. You'll hear this in people describing themselves. I drove the car down town yesterday and it was difficult. very common framing. People saying that they're an it. And this is common in our language, and it is a distancing of ourselves from ourselves. It's the common frame that science uses the third person descriptive range of language to describe the world, and you've all been taught to use that when you talk about yourself. And we're trying to move to the first person, I am statements. I am X, Y, Z, I am disturbed, I am sad, I am, yes?
Would you say the sentence with the near?
Which is,
And you use the language near distance. So could you demonstrate going downtown and
that again?
in the near?
In the near.
Mhm.
I am driving downtown and I'm feeling really upset and hot. So it is hot and uncomfortable. The it is an abstraction, and this is,
Boy, and you told us a lot more.
yeah, I'm experienced near. You can hook to me. And that's the part of it, is that you can then identify with what I'm saying because you're saying something about your experience that is what is called experience near language. Poetry, good literature, excited, passionate discourse, very finely tuning into each other, talking to each other with language that isn't abstract.
How about being descriptive of the situation?
That's also what I would say is that we try to avoid that, but we can't avoid it completely because we are saying, are you sitting on a chair? And in that I'm describing a chair in some sense. Can you say more? I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, for instance, about the driving being difficult, traffic was bumper to bumper.
Yeah. For who?
The driver who's irritated and hot.
Right, that's it.
But
That
that's
you're
you.
changing from the
When you say that.
descriptive to I am in the experience. And that makes the whole... When you're presenting yourself with that language, then you're presenting more of yourself by saying I'm hot and disturbed because of this traffic, rather than it is a terrible day of traffic. All of
So
this,
if someone says that, then you say, and how did that affect you? If they go into that distant, then you bring them back.
right,
And how did that affect you? Okay.
right, to present-centered language that is expressive of their inner life.
Okay.
Okay, now, that's one point under this experience near, experience distant language and rhetoric when you're presenting a class. So then I want to come down here that the way to do this is, another form here is that using experience near language most of the time when I'm giving a class. Also then coming down here to naming and not naming. That, I think you asked this question, what do you name in the work? Of, like when I'm giving an experiment, I'll say, can you feel the floor under you? I'm naming the floor. I'm naming what to look for. I'm naming where to put your attention. And I do that, let's say, 10% of the time. The rest of the time I'm not naming. I'm building a frame of what are you standing on? How are you able to stand? How is it that you find support. Each one of those questions, when framed that way, call for a subjective search and response in the person that puts them into an active present moment. It's experience of the interactive dependence of present-centered experiential events. That's an abstract term for what I just said. That's describing and not being. Being is, how do you know that you're standing? Yes?
So when you asked, no, you didn't ask, you put out into the air about the nuts and the bolts going around the circle?
Say again?
When we were going around the circle, you made a statement, something that along the line that used the word nuts and bolts.
Yeah.
What was the intention of your teaching statement?
You know what? I need you to speak up about twice the volume you're speaking.
Okay,
Can't hear you.
when we were going around the circle, at some point as a leader, you said something about going to the nuts and the bolts. What was the language and the intention of that statement at that time?
Oh, we were talking about business. The business of doing the guild. And I was using a metaphor of that there has to be a time in a community to talk about the nuts and bolts of cleaning up the kitchen and cleaning the toilets, as well as talking about our sublime intentions.
And how does that relate to naming and not naming? And are your feet on the floor or what's underneath you? Or is it just...
That was just my metaphor that came to me at that time.
Okay.
But it's a vivid metaphor. I try to use vivid metaphors to encapsulate all kinds of terms and ideas.
So that's... Okay. Thank you.
And that would be, yes, that would be a form of trying to use vivid language in leading and presenting this work. It's very important that the language be vivid in some way. Does that help you?
Yeah, no, it did, because there was a shift of weight in the room, in the air.
Uh-huh.
To me, that was my experience in my heart.
Uh-huh.
And I felt myself settle down.
Uh-huh.
It seems like you were naming. You were naming something that needs our focus.
Yeah.
But not right now.
And it was
Not
no,
you would say, not right now, everybody
Yeah.
can went, oh, good.
Yeah.
So it was really
Yeah,
wonderful.
you gave us
Uh-huh.
permission
We'll do
to
that
move
later.
on.
And in that metaphor, it took me back to being on the boat, like the water's changing now. So metaphorically, my mind shifted to metaphor. And
Uh-huh.
sometimes I get in a class and I can feel when metaphors are not working in the group, and I sense that language needs to change somehow.
Great.
So I try to do that. And
Right.
not add extra like Lee had said, just shut up.
Yeah.
From
Great.
Well, no, that's how I interpret. She says to pause, but because of the way I am in my excitatory state, it's good for me to just say shut up.
Yeah.
So I'll shut up.
I do that to myself too, all the time. And yeah, great. So this is what I'm hoping to happen this morning is questions and comments that as I bring these themes that we talk about, because there are the 13,000 different things I'm not going to name. I'm only going to talk about, let's say, 20 items in the bird's nest, and you guys will have to help us pick out what are all of the nuances here. And then later I'll do some experiments. So far are we understanding? Are there questions or anything so far that you'd like me to clarify that's still not quite clear to you so far? Yes?
Well, a concern that I have is that we set up a time schedule yesterday. I love this. I knew it was going to take more than half an hour. However, we set up something that something else was going to start at 10. Is that right?
Stefan was going to.
Right. So in order to settle,
You
I
need to
need
clarify.
to No, I need to just say that we're doing something different than what we planned yesterday.
We are.
And
Yes, we are.
Okay, I think it's a valid point, so let's find out what was supposed to happen at 10 o'clock.
We were going to open it up to hear from different leaders, how they approach some of these questions.
When you finished.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I guess that what I would like to know is how do you feel about it? Is that okay with you? Because you were going to hold that space with everybody.
Well, I'm your servant, so. So, it seems like we're in the middle of this, and for me, it seemed important to hold the space open for a variety of voices on how leading classes is approached, but that doesn't need to happen.
Can we? I'm feeling we can do that
some
now.
practical work together, but
Maybe you could just simply ask us if we have any feelings about any of these items, rather than spitting the data and us swallowing it.
yeah,
Okay.
it could be some kind of an interactive
Yeah, right.
thing where,
Yeah,
maybe
hear
other
me.
leaders chime in and say, this is how I approach this.
Right.
But I think
But
it's
he
just
didn't
right.
hear what I said.
Oh,
No, I didn't.
I said you could give a way of offering the data that we can say how we feel about it and not just have to swallow it.
Right. That's what I think we're doing. That I'm trying
Thank
to
you. We all
evoke
agree.
that.
So I
Yeah.
really like this thing of naming versus not naming, because it goes under our assumptions. It gets us really down to the basics, Does anybody else have some good ways to do that? To not name stuff? So that the person can go to their essence instead of thinking, oh, it's a floor, it's made out of this, or, wherever they go with. When you say, can you feel the floor under you, versus what are you standing on? All of you have wonderful language skills, ways that you...
This is what I was referring to yesterday. I think it clarifies it about not wanting to refer to compartmentalized ways of seeing yourself in the work, but having it be more of the way you're describing, the opening you're giving. Having all of the experiences have an opening to them, so that you're not focusing a thought or a perception or a way of being with it in a very narrow way, but more of I love this, the way you're describing it, because it makes it more authentically present for me.
I also feel it's really, I don't want to take this is not the Bible, and I don't want to feel like this is the rules that then everybody's following, because I think that you're working sometimes and you see somebody who's there with their shoulders up to their ears, and you very well may say something about shoulders, because you're offering an invitation that's really out of connection to somebody. So I don't feel like it's necessarily, means that you're more connected to sensing because you're not naming anything. I understand what you're saying, and I also just feel like it's a dance of presence, and it's not some rigid thing because then you're going to be sitting there thinking in your head, okay, now I'm not supposed to name, so I'm going to be thinking about the rule, and I'm not going to be in contact with myself or the other person.
No, this slash indicates both and. That both and are taking place. You cannot do sensing without naming. You have to at times say your shoulders, and their intention will go there because you said that. And that's part of the dance of doing this work also, is that you're paying attention to how your words are landing, and you're trying to phrase it so that when you're saying something to the group, as I'm doing right now, I'm asking you, how are my words landing in you? And give me feedback. And it's another part of sensing work for me, is constant feedback. Constant sitting down, what's this mean to you? How are you doing this? Go on.
Yeah. No, well, coming back to what Sarah said about the scope of the morning.
Yeah.
I really feel that the need to honor it not just to go, for you to continue however long, but to kind of say what continue with what is essential and move to the next.
Okay, you're not being clear. What do you want?
Did anyone hear me?
Yeah, because I think because we have two other agendas for this morning.
Yeah.
One was that Stefan was going to do something at 10 o'clock, and then at 11
Uh-huh.
o'clock, what's at 11? There's some, I can't see the agenda back there. So.
Richard,
Sensory awareness.
what's unique?
Unique, mindfulness, Richard.
So I think what I hear Jill saying is that it's important that you work within a framework.
Okay, I think I can end by 11. How's that?
I think that's important.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so too.
I think 11 is too long.
Well, I'm not going to be able to do the presentation unless I have that.
If we're doing what Stefan was saying about getting everybody's feedback around mindfulness, that was what was going to happen between 10 and 11.
I don't feel we're doing exactly that, though.
I do.
Isn't that what's
I'm
going
giving
on?
you frames of what is mindfulness, and I do want feedback and responses.
I don't mean mindfulness, I'm mixed up, not mindfulness, about the questions about how do people
How to lead
frame
sensing.
language. That was going to happen. Not Richard was going to do it from 11 to 12. I think we were saying we want that protected. And I think what we're saying,
Okay.
and I guess I think it's important to just maybe find out if that's okay with people, that we continue in this way about that we integrate our feedback in about how we use language as Seymour is working, but we do it within this next half hour and it stops at 11.
Right,
Okay.
right.
Stefan, is
Everybody
that
okay
good
with
with you
that?
again? Because I feel like we have to keep going back to you because you were involved.
Yeah, I think we kind of started a conversation and we ended it. We need to make a decision, that's all. And I'm totally fine with continuing until 11 with all of us inspired by what you say and what everybody says to
And
chime
share
in.
what-
Yeah.
I think that's fine.
It's interactive, so.
Yeah, I want interaction
Yeah.
here.
Is that okay with
It's
you?
not me just blah, 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 but that I'm trying to pick out ways that frames and useful terms and categories that have come to me, and I'm trying to give some, what can I say, legs up in doing this work for people who are not really understanding some of the basic principles.
Could you,
Just wanted to say, Eric Byrne, Games People Play, came up with one of the games was Let's You and Him Argue. And in a way, I feel like that's what I did by not being more specific. I brought up a problem, but not really how I was feeling about it. And what I want to say from this is that I was feeling uncomfortable, but my intention and what I'm feeling more comfortable about now is if we use this, what Seymour is bringing as kind of a structure, and if everybody has a chance who wants to, who leads, to say what they think is important in leading an experiment, like Lee just did, not to get so tight that we never use the word body, for example, which is something that's always bothered me a lot. Somebody says body, and we say, oh, no, we never do that. And a lot of time gets wasted that way. That, for me, we will complete what we did, what we said we were going to do between 9:30 and 11. So I am in favor of going forward with what we're doing if people feel comfortable about offering what they think is essential in leading.
Yes.
Yeah, so my
And not
sense
just
is-
directed to language, but whatever.
My sense is we're talking more about a dialogue at some point for people to feel open to
Sure.
discuss. And we're talking about that there's no way we're going to cover all the little things in the bird nest, but we're just going to start opening a conversation that I think needs to continue in more of these leaders groups.
well,
This is just a first stab at it. Go ahead.
and I will just say that there is a difference between your continuing to lead this and your being a part of the group that is participating in a different way if, say, Stefan were to sit for the next half hour and you participate as one of the leaders.
I see.
And
I'm still
it's-
not clear what you're saying. Are you saying that I should give up my podium so that Stephen can come in? I don't want to do that.
Yeah,
wanna-
I see that. you
I
know.
want to give this frame, and then you can do whatever you want to with it. But I do need a certain amount of time without interruption and discussion to do that.
And I guess, so here we have a choice, where we can focus on coming to consensus, which will take us a half an hour. Or we can say, what's my sense of the from what I've heard the most comments is people want to go ahead with this. And I hear and acknowledge the difference that you're bringing up. I'm very grateful that this was brought up, because I think it's not okay to disregard an agreement that's made by the group and just
Right.
continue
I don't
on
either.
and drop that. I'm sorry, I'm really grateful that both of you have brought up that as a question. And my suggestion is to really acknowledge, I really hear you, and it is a very different process. And if the bulk of the people acknowledging this and recognizing it want to engage in this way, and everybody, and I don't think it's so much about Seymour inviting us to speak up. I think it's about each one of us being true to what we have to share, and each of us speaking up. And so that to receive, because, I also, for me personally, I think you've given a lot of thought to this. I think it's a very interesting framework for us to engage with, and I feel strongly that we stop at 11.
Okay, I do too.
Is that okay?
Yes.
I can acknowledge that, and I think, and I'm not happy with it, and I can live with it.
Good.
But I think this is one of the issues when we're talking about us speaking up,
Yeah.
that it's not only about this, it's our speaking up about the sense in how something moves forward. And I feel it's not moving forward in the way that I feel is integral to the group. So that's how I feel.
Coming along with this, okay, how would we deal with a sensing class where there's someone in the class who's not in agreement with what's going on? How do we deal with that
Brilliant.
in a sensing
I
class?
think we ask each of us to stay present with what's happening in us and to be present for it and be with it. And we don't have to be perfect. We don't have to be perfect.
Or like everything.
Right.
Okay, could I name this as a power struggle and move on?
Well,
I
like
no,
better.
Seymour,
I like
I'm
better.
not comfortable with that.
Why?
No.
I'm not comfortable
No.
with that.
Why?
Because I don't think it's about a power struggle.
It is a power struggle.
We were getting somewhere else with this.
We are.
I don't feel that it's about a power struggle. Difference doesn't necessarily mean a power struggle.
We can turn this
Well, it is a
into
power
learning
struggle when
tool
there's an
rather
agenda,
than
and I'm saying I want to
argument.
do this for a half an hour, and
But
there's
you've
time.
gone past it, so that's not, so it's not a power struggle. You've taken over something different from the group. And I think we're saying we want to move forward, but this, I was completely ready to go forward, but for you to name it, it feels dismissive, and that doesn't feel okay
It does
to me.
feel dismissive.
Unless you take responsibility for the fact that you exerted power by starting out by saying this is going to take more than half an hour, even though we said, yesterday you said half an hour. Now
Right.
we're agreeing here, most of us, not Jill, to say, okay, Seymour took power. We're finding a way to go along with that. We may not like that. We may have to deal with you on that in some other time. But we don't want to take the time now to do it.
Okay, you just said what I was thinking.
That's good. Okay, let's go.
Okay,
Can we move
go.
on?
Can we move
Yes,
on?
let's
Yes.
move on.
Go ahead.
Okay, so moving down this chart of how to present an experiment so that it's experienced near and in the present, and also what we're doing, like the two different forms of indication or stating what we want the people to do is the do form, command form, do X, stand up, sit down, and the invitation form of can you stand up, can you sit down, that evokes and is what is part of this right now, I think, this discussion of constantly empowering the person, constantly empowering that the choice made is made by them coming inside of yourself and saying, well, when you give me a command form, I'm going to react to that. And that's what's happening here. I've done a command form, and we get the reaction to the command form, and there's a power struggle that goes on. So in doing sensory awareness or leading anything, there is a time to command and say, let's come together and do this. But in sensory awareness, we're doing much more this invitational form of like, you're invited to participate. How do you like this? That Seymour is standing up here and telling us something a half hour after he should. So this is part of the work to explore this. What happens when you're given a command form? Most of us are in our lives dealing with that, and it's a very important part of shifting the inner landscape of the personality from the inner, I command myself, I should do this, I have to do this, all of those inner commands to a kind of a, I'm inviting myself to explore X, Y, Z. The invitational form, rather than the authoritarian structure of our authoritarian culture that's put in us that the expert knows. And we have learned that the expert doesn't know. The expert is us. The expert is us. So the experiments are about how to evoke more and more of the sense of the personality, being able to say, this is me, I am here, these are my dimensions, this is what I'm experiencing, and if someone challenges that, I can challenge them, their challenge. I feel empowered to explore my own definitions. And that's kind of what we're trying to do, is to present an experiment that allows the person to explore their discriminatory powers.
Along these lines, one thing that I find interesting and puzzling often is that with command and invitation is that I will set up an experiment that could be, let's say, we walk and my invitations go towards experiencing the floor and our connection with the floor. And then, I see people just looking at all kinds of things and as they walk. And I know that's actually not part of the experiment that we're doing right now. It's not looking around and reading the pamphlets and stuff like that. And to which degree to then say, no, that's not what we're doing now. The experiment is this. But sometimes it's not so clear, I ask somebody to do this and they do this.
Yeah.
And for how long can I let this go, because that might help people to come to that experiment. When is it helpful to basically go into the command form and say, no, do this now? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah.
That to me is always a tricky realm of, how is framing and limiting what we ask people to do helpful for them to come to an experience, where otherwise maybe they just...
Does repeating the invitation help? Just saying the invitation again at a point that you feel is going on.
Sometimes.
Stefan is doing what I'd like to have happen is people now respond. What is this? Bring up?
Sometimes for me it will depend on who it is. And what I sense their issues are.
One person at a time. Okay, Richard?
Yeah, so sometimes for me it would depend on who the student is. If it's someone that's very compliant and they're doing something that's, for them, is kind of expanding their ability to be rebellious, I might allow that to continue.
Okay.
it's someone who's just very distracted in their life, then I would try to improvise something that would kind of address the issue of distraction. So it wouldn't necessarily be something that it would just be for. I would be just looking at the entire class and making a group decision about if I saw 2 or 3 people being distracted the way you're describing. So for me, it's a lot of improvising and just kind of going with what kind of energy you're picking up, and sometimes it is the individual, because there's all these different individuals and they all have their different issues that they're bringing.
And an example of that is in, seeing that, and as you were saying, repeating or offering again, and then to say a new student who I see is not, is looking all over and everything, to try and bring it back down to simply walking. And someone who's worked a lot afterwards saying, you didn't have to repeat it, I heard it the first time. So you have these new and these more experienced.
It's also interesting, though, because, in some ways, like, I want people to trust what their own experience is telling them. I mean, I also tell them to do that. Even if I'm asking you to stand up, there's something in you that's not ready to stand up, then why are you going to pay attention to me? At the same time, there are times when, because my sense is somebody's really not in what they're doing, then I may be more assertive about, doing some kind of a command. And it was interesting because actually at a workshop in Mexico a few years ago, we were trying to make a decision as a group about whether to go to this beach because it might rain and the weather might be bad. So some of you were there and remember. And Terry was there, and Terry and I had a really interesting discussion afterwards, because for me, that whole decision-making process was completely sensing. And how do people listen to different people's opinions, and how are people talking? It went on most of the class. It took us hours. And Terry said, why didn't you just tell people what we were going to do? I mean, this is not sensing. And so we had a really interesting discussion about it. And we didn't agree. Because for me, I thought, this is a great experiment. It's a perfect experiment. I couldn't be happier. And it was, people were frustrated, and it was just... So it's interesting, we have different perspectives.
Can I go on here?
Yeah.
So I'd like to just... So all of the invitations that we're inviting have to do with connecting with the surroundings.
Right.
That this is number one principle of interactive systems theory, or the theories around what the organism is doing in the environment of people and things, that you're constantly interacting. And there are times when you're going inside and outside. There's this shuffle of spending time outside gathering information, learning what's there, and then going inside and finding out what that all means to you, and being subjective. Outer world, inner world. There's this constant play, and to capture that when you're working is important. To watch people. What are they doing? Who's inside? Can you encourage them to stay inside? Who's outside? Encourage them to be outside, so that you're mixing it all up. But all invitations have to do with some relationship. How are you responding to your thoughts and moods? Do your thoughts carry a sense of mood with them? Where do you feel that mood? Those are all interactive questions, all questions that have to do with an interaction, and that there is, in this position, there is no essence, there is no soul, there is no perfect place, there is no, let's say, foundation in consciousness. Consciousness, described as a foundational process, misses the whole point. Consciousness is multifaceted and constantly shifting from superficial to deep. Okay, then when I make up indications and invitations, I'm using contrasts. And behind this is we know nothing unless we have contrasts. We cannot apprehend a thing if we're not developing contrasts. We get lost in diffuse, what is it? So, in my experiments, I'm always saying, get a stone, get a stick, lay on a stick, stand up, lay down. What's it like to open your eyes? What's it like to close your eyes? I'm building in all kinds of contrasts that are natural phenomena, that are actual phenomena, so that I'm naming and giving experiments around phenomena that exist. Whereas the rhetoric of religious discourse might be, are you in connection with the divine? How is your relationship with the sublime? These kinds of things are not our questions. Our questions are about bare bones. What is the motoric organism? What's the organism doing in its surround with people and things? And how can we help this sense of coordination so that there is, let's say, an experience of the self, of the person, and their surroundings. And to make experiments that create more density in that.
I'm sorry, Seymour.
What's
Create
that
more
mean?
what?
Density.
Density? Oh, okay.
So, in doing this, it's critical that you're pacing these invitations. The indications are paced. I was reading one of the pamphlets of Charlotte talking about being present, and there's long pause, 1 minute pause. This, I think, is the most critical danger in new teachers or old teachers. I do it too. I talk too much. I give too much indication, too many indications without giving them time to let it land in them. And the last thing I'd like to bring up are these two things. That the teacher, I like the word teacher, by the way. I am teaching something. And we're doing the experiment as we're giving it. And I'm watching people. I'm watching how are they responding to the reactions of the work. And I'm adjusting my indications, dropping what I started with if it's not landing, shifting and recasting my indication so that it's fitting more what's going on. Is this person, I'm saying like, can you feel your connection to the earth under you? I'm using myself as an example. Can you feel your connection to the earth under you? Now, if you're a sensory awareness person of deep knowledge, you'll notice that I'm frozen in my legs, that I'm not really connected, that I am stiff-legged, my knees are locked, and I'm not in connection with what's under me. And so in seeing that with someone, I'd have to say, experiment with letting your knees float a little bit. What is that like when you let your weight sink and raise up again? What happens? They start to move away from a fixed position with gravity and the interactive world. The world demands interactive, flexible responses, not stiffness. But like, can you then, what's that like then? So those are the kinds of things I build up. Is in watching, I'm also seeing how the experiment of standing is working with the person, and I'm having to do this constant watching of the reactions. And another mistake of people who think sensory awareness is a set of recipes that you give to people and don't watch what their reaction is. They just go on and on and on and not really change the recipe. And so I think with this, I can stop. I wanted to do an experiment. I don't know if I have time, but I'd like to just say that's my presentation, and I'd like to hear from you. What do you think of this? And then if we have, it's now 10 minutes to 11, if we have 5 minutes for an experiment, I'd like to do that.
I'd like to make sure we have a break between the two presentations. I don't know if we're going to have the time to
Okay.
do
At
that.
11.
Okay, let's do this then.
Yeah, let's.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I just, when you were asking the question, can you feel your connection to the floor or to the earth under you? I might more likely ask the question, is there something under you?
Right.
When I hear the question, can you feel the connection to the floor?
He said
I
that.
immediately go into my head and think, well, what's the connection? How am I supposed to feel it? Rather than,
He said that was naming.
okay, I'm just.
And
let
you
me-
said the second thing you said was not naming.
She's just showing what she would say.
Oh, yeah, I'm
And
sorry.
I would be more likely, or feel more, anyway, the naming makes me go to a different place other than sense.
Yeah.
I think.
Good that you noticed that. That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I think that's such a crucial thing. And you said something about vivid language, and in our work we don't work with images, and at the same time we can't avoid working with images because our language is a set of images, and I sometimes take some liberty with images. I might even set it up and say, in this work we don't use images, and here is one. Like, sometimes I play with, I have people walk, and we play with, we work with the connection with the floor, and then I will say, now imagine that the floor could feel your steps. How would you walk if your presence was felt?
Right.
And it's definite, it's an image or an imagination that some people will, go into philosophical orgasm about. How the earth can feel us. But I find it to be very helpful as an image, because I would say, how would you walk if it mattered how you step on this ground?
Yeah, well, I would say that that's what you're doing, is giving an indication that connects with the surroundings, that you're building an indication that is a connection with the surroundings kind of question. Well,
Yeah.
how do you develop this kind of interactive cueing?
And one of the things that what you suggested reminds me of is sometimes when person's sitting and we work in pairs and bring our hands under the feet of another person and allow more and more weight. The person who's sitting to allow more and more weight to come
Yeah, then
into
the ground
hands.
is feeling
Then,
your presence.
and then when you walk on the ground, it's a very different. I mean, it often can be a very different experience because you have this living experience under your feet, under you.
Yeah, but I kind of wanted to expand on that, to have that openness. Can you feel that there is anything under you? That supports you. That's already more specific.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then, but then there's a shift to the more imaginative. How about if that what's under you could feel you? How would you then be present with it?
Well, it's interesting, this whole question of images. I mean, I think that's a really interesting question that for us, it would be interesting to explore, how have any of us used that? And if you're using an image, is there a way to use it that's inviting people to really have an experience that's not going into their heads? And I think it's an interesting dialogue.
And actually, one of the first things that occurred to me were IEDs.
What's that?
IEDs.
What's that?
Improvised explosive devices.
In Iraq and Afghanistan, and what? You're walking, and all of a sudden, you're gone.
Yeah. I haven't used that in class.
What is it about that?
Well, I think it's one of
felt
the
you?
traumatic. Yeah, it
Yeah.
definitely felt you, and it exploded, and it's hidden. The essence of an IED is that it's hidden, and it's the most common weapon.
But what does that have to do? I don't understand what
Yeah.
that has to do with what we were talking about.
With walking,
To be careful not to walk in the
Don't use that image.
I'd like to say one more thing, and then I'd like to stop. One of the most important categories is presence and absence. Are you present? Are you present for what? And when you're giving a class, you'll notice people are present for an experiment for a while, and then you'll see there's a disconnect, and they're probably fantasizing. They're probably withdrawing into something that is not present. One has to allow for that. There's no such thing as being fully present all the time. That we're coming and going all the time between contacting something alive and then withdrawing and digesting that in our own self. And that's part of the experiment too, is giving an experiment, and it calls for a lot of presence. And you'll notice after that, let's say, touching someone and being with someone, you might find that after touching for a while, you have to go into yourself. You've had enough of that other person, or enough of the outer world. So that experiments need to be built also with acceptance of absence. I'd like to make a period on my lecture this morning, and thank you for this lively class.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was
Pretty discussion.
So we can take a break and go
Yeah,
down?
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just want
I wonder about that twig.